Hey guys, Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I want to have a little discussion sort of where our meta is now, and I really want to talk about cards and techs you could be running to sort of help you in the current meta game, because this meta is one of the more closed off ones we've had in a while, and I just want to sort of reflect on recent tournaments, how the meta is even at the local scene, and everything going on with our current meta, do a little bit of an analysis on it, and then tell you guys what cards you can use to sort of hedge your bets against winning in this current format. So before we go into that, I do want to let you guys know Discord link down below, along with all of our other social media links if you want to follow the channel more closely. Also, I'm climbing up the 10,000 ladder, so I'm trying to hit 20,000 subscribers. So if you do like this Yu-Gi-Oh content and you want to see more of it, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. So without further ado, let's start talking about sort of the recent big tournaments that happened. And I made a little Excel spreadsheet, not the most pretty thing to look at, but it will work for what I need it to do. Looking at like YCS Brazil, European Nationals, Oceanic Nats, I would say these are our biggest tournaments that we've had in sort of Power of the Elements format. Now I know YCS Brazil was like not that big, Oceanic Nats was even smaller, but these are still like premier events, so we can definitely count them. The biggest tournament though was definitely European Nationals. However, it was at the beginning of the format, and things have sort of shifted a little bit even since then. So let's start off with YCS Brazil, because I think it's definitely the most interesting on this list and something that, never should have happened. Mystic Mine Burn won the event, and Mystic Mine is something we have all been complaining about for a long time. Decks like these take it to the extreme. It's not like a combo deck running Mystic Mine, which is extremely annoying. It is Mystic Mine as a win condition with burn cards. And second place, interestingly enough, was Math Mech, and I think that is really cool, because Math Mech has sort of been a sleeper pick in the format that we knew was good. Like, we knew this deck was strong, but it wasn't doing as much as we thought it would, maybe to an extent, or even, I mean, honestly, if you ask me, at the beginning of Power of the Elements, it's doing more than I thought it would. But we'd known this was good, and this was sort of its highest placement ever, so nice to see Math Mech there. Talking about European Nationals, which is sort of the beginning of Power of the Elements, and things have shifted since then. Rika Sun Avalon, a deck very near and dear to my heart since I do have a regional top with it. It won the event, and that was super amazing. It really showed how powerful Rika is as a deck and that it can compete, and it shows that besides just the top two decks, there are rogue decks that can compete in this format. In fact, if you look at the winning decks of these events, of the three events, only one of the top two decks actually won it, so that's interesting. Second place at European Nationals was Tearlaments, so nothing surprising there. Oceanic Nats will see Tearlament Pure winning, which was a deck without the dangers, and then at second place, I believe, was Tearlament Danger. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm 99% sure. I even watched the finals, but if I'm wrong on that, you can definitely leave it down below. This was sort of made off of like some quick research and memory. Now, interestingly enough, when you look at this is only first and second place, right? So it shows the finals of the big events. You'll notice no Spright here, which is crazy, right? Even though we know Spright is one of the dominating, factors of this format, but it shows me that a lot of people either are preparing very hard for Spright, know that matchup more through testing, or that Tearlament truly has a higher ceiling and is performing better. But yeah, this is sort of where our big events have led us, and that's sort of where I'm going to leave this part off. Now I want to hop into what I personally consider are the top 5 decks of the format before we start talking about cards you can use to beat them. Alright, so here is sort of how I'm going to tier the top 5 decks only. I just did a tier list video, but that was like a week ago, so it's not going to look too different. But what I didn't do was rank top 5. I only showed things how I tiered them. So yeah, I'm going to do the top 5 decks so I can sort of explain what cards beat specifically those decks. Alright, so what I would put in top 5, let's start with the very easy ones that I don't think need much explanation. I'm going to put Tearlament in tier 1. Really, I'm going to put this in the best deck. I think Tearlament is the best deck right now. As we saw from the spreadsheet, Tearlament is doing much better than Spright at premier events. I'm not showing the whole picture of the top, 4, top 8, where Spright are definitely seeing representation. But as far as making it the farthest, I think Tearlament have proven themselves as arguably the best deck this format. Second place, I'm definitely going to put in Spright. You know what? I could rank it like this. I was going to do like this, like first and second, and then put 3 in the next decks, but maybe I could, I'll do it like that. 3rd through 5th, we'll put here. Because I think it's really hard to rank all 5 without putting a lot of thought into it, but I think this is sort of what I think is true right now. I think Spright definitely is seeing the representation it always needed to. And then Tearlament is just edging it out a little bit better. Now, when you get to the 3rd through 5th, it gets really interesting because we're in what I would call a 2-deck format. A lot of people would agree. These are the most powerful decks by a decent margin, not anything too crazy in my opinion. Because I honestly think that Rika, every time I play this deck, it feels a lot stronger than these decks. I think if people give this deck a shot, they'll realize that tributing for cost is an insane mechanic. And honestly, Rika is just such a powerful deck, but it's not really seeing the representation it deserves. So its representation is low, so definitely not going up here. I think Math Mech is very easily top 5 as well. Definitely just a super strong deck. And then when you get to 5th right now, it's really interesting. A lot of those events were sort of pre-Tactical Masters, right? We didn't have Tactical Masters to shake up the format. Now, Tactical Masters didn't do much to shake up the format, but I do think when you get to what is the 5th best deck right now, and you look at all these decks down here, whatever can show on the screen, you might be able to say it's pure punk. Like, I'll put a maybe top 5 category, and like pure punk could go there. I think there's a couple of options that could go in like maybe top 5. Like, you might have Drytron there, you might have Fluandereeze, wherever that one is, you might have Exosister. But what I think is the 5th best deck right now might actually be a Runic variant, and that's because Mystic Mine is also being played as a Runic variant now, which is crazy because you can run it out to Mystic Mine and they can banish it with Runic cards, which is hilarious. You know, alternatively, they could dig you closer to your out, so just depending on how you're looking at it. But yeah, I mean, Runic could be, like, there's so many different versions of Runic right now. Runic Spright is picking up so much steam as one of the better versions of Spright. Runic Mystic Mine is huge. Pure Runic, I think, actually top 32 Brazil, I think. Don't quote me on that. But Pure Runic was essentially Mystic Mine Runic. So I think this deck could be, like, ending up being the 5th place, but I don't know if I want to say that for sure. Definitely any of these could be the 5th place deck, so don't, you know, attack me in the comments. This is sort of, any of these could probably be 5th. But yeah, you guys can leave me down below in the comment what you think the 5th best deck in the current format is. I think, honestly, the top 4 are pretty solid in my opinion, and then the 5th could be like any of these. But feel free to leave down below what you guys think the 5th best deck is. I'll be sure to read it. And yeah, without further ado, let's finally start talking about cards you can use to beat the current meta decks. Alright, so I do want to remind you guys, if you are enjoying this video, feel free to hit that like button. It really helps me out in what I do here on the channel. And yeah, let's start getting to talking about cards that beat the decks we just went over. So as we previously mentioned, it looks like Tearlament is definitely seeming to be the best deck. And, you know, we're obviously going to talk about some cards that beat Tearlament, right? We all know about Crow. We all know about Ghost Bell. But if Tearlament is going to still be a huge threat, right? Like, there are much harder cards that you can use to side versus specifically Tearlaments. You have things like Silent Graveyard, which used to be called Forbidden Graveyard. If you're thinking about this card, you'd wonder why the name sounds different. Yeah, it used to be something else. Obviously, this card destroys Tearlament. You have Shadow Imprisoning. I need a dash, so we're going to go ahead and add that. Shadow Imprisoning, obviously hard counter to Tearlaments. Now, the issue with, I think, both of these cards, and even these to an extent, is these only hit Tearlament, like the monsters themselves. The problem with Tearlament now is that they're more of a combo deck, especially the Danger version. Yes, Pure just did really well winning Oceanic Nationals. However, I would say the Danger version is now the most popular version of Tearlament. So what's really actually good against that version of Tearlaments is Nibiru, and this is a card that definitely worked very well for, I believe, the winner of Oceanic Nationals. I believe he talked very in depth in his profile about Nibiru, or at least mentioned how good the card is. And yeah, it's true, if Tearlament's going to be the best deck and they're not playing around Nibiru at all because Nibiru's kind of been out of the format thanks to Spright, yeah, Nibiru actually dominates Tearlaments. So this card could be pretty insane for just wiping out a Tearlament board. They're not even playing Winda often anymore, so this card is actually just a very good card versus a lot of what we see in the top meta. This card is good versus Math Mech, because they're usually going to do plays before they go for their Diameter, so this card can definitely be a good stop to that. This card is very good versus Rika if you catch them on special summoning their Princess, or they use Princess on a different hand trap you had. So this card is good versus Rika. good versus the Mathmech deck, good versus Tearlament. It's weird versus Spright. Now, a lot of Spright players will end up on boards if they're going like for the Hulk lines, where you can actually Nibiru them before they're safe, but that's only if they're going for the Hulk stuff. So this usually needs to be with another hand trap. I'm going to put these actually down here because they're cards I wanted to talk about that are maybe not as strong as something like this right now. I think Nibiru actually could find its way coming back into the format because it is so good versus almost everything. Spright has an asterisk next to it, and if Runic is really good, then this is not good versus Runic at all. But again, there's a couple of other options you could say are the 5th best deck. Like if you say it's Exo Sister, Nibiru destroys that deck just so hard. Like it is actually its worst nightmare. So I think Nibiru is actually an insane card for the current meta. Sort of leaning away from Tearlament specifically though, let's hop into another deck where we talk about cards that are good versus it. We have Spright. Of course, Spright is, you know, an insane deck. You still have to prepare for it, even if it's not maybe putting up the same numbers Tearlaments are. I mean, it is, just not as far as finals are concerned. So what hits Spright? Obviously you have the very hard counters like the ban played on for Spright. This card obviously destroys Spright. You have, I believe, Stygian Dirge. I think that's a card people were trying to play. Yeah, you can run Stygian Dirge. There was Mischief of the Gnomes, which was something you could play in like Tearlament because you're milling a lot of cards to hit Spright. But these, all three of these also kind of faded out. We don't need to hit Spright that hard. Like really, you probably shouldn't be siding for Spright as hard as these. Mischief of the Gnomes maybe in a mill deck like Tearlament or side decked in like Virtual World when you're making Beatrice. But honestly, these aren't that great versus other things. Like it's okay versus Rika. It's really not good versus what am I trying to say? It's pretty good versus Mathmech actually, now that I'm thinking at it, but it's just okay. And it's not good versus Tearlament. That's the deck I was looking for. So these cards here, definitely more hard counters for Spright. But if you're talking about like a card that's shifting in the meta that can really deal with Spright, a card I want to talk about is Ghost Ogre. Here is definitely a card I want to talk about as a low impact that can hit Spright. Like it's really hard to have a very specific card that hits Spright because that deck was made and designed by Konami to play around as many cards as possible. Like they can play through so many different forms of interruption through Red and Gigantic, so you can't list things like Phantasme, even Nibiru to an extent, Gamma. While those are like, well, Gamma specifically is good versus Spright, it's not like a hard counter. So I want to talk about some low impacts that are good versus Spright, which Ghost Ogre is one of them. If you open this plus any other hand trap to potentially stop Red, this on Gigantic is huge. And you could say the same thing about Gamma, right? Gamma, these right here, Gamma's interesting because it's kind of good versus Tearlament. It's alright versus Tearlament as well. I'm still going to end up putting these down here now that I'm thinking about it because they're just low impacts that are like pretty good. I don't know, they could go up here. Like what I'm noticing is the really good cards I'm talking about here are hand traps that we've seen in past formats, but they're still really good. So honestly, Shadow Imprisoning as well is not bad versus Spright. It's not great, don't get me wrong, it's not great, but it stops Jet, Blue, and Gigantic. So if you were siding this for Tearlament and you're not on a dark deck, this also is good versus Spright. Now interestingly enough, talking about Ghost Ogre against Rika as well, right? This card is great versus Rika because the most powerful thing in their arsenal is definitely the field spell. So if you're able to Ghost Ogre the field spell, you've done what any hand trap you would want to do, like at its peak performance, Ghost Ogre has done by getting rid of the field spell. And especially if you could combo these against Rika, that's pretty much game if they don't have another way to stop a hand trap besides Princess. Like if they have Rivalry of the Warlords, of course, you know, that's really good. But yeah, I mean, Ghost Ogre is just pretty insane right now, to be honest. I think this is a really good hand trap, and people say it's not good versus Tearlament, which to an extent I agree. It's very mid versus that deck, but if you're maining this card, it actually has a lot of applications if you really think about it. Think about Time Thief Redoer. If you Ghost Ogre his effect on Detach, you destroy it, he does not detach, they don't get their Fusion Summon. Amazing out to Redoer. Same thing with Draco Stapelia, you just out it. This can hit their field spell to pop, which is great. There's actually a couple of things that are pretty good with Ghost Ogre versus that deck, which is important to notice. Also, the Brave Engine, Brave Spright was picking up a little bit of steam a couple weeks ago. I think since then, since Tactical Masters, Runic Spright has been the deck picking up more steam. But versus the Brave Engine, Ghost Ogre is pretty good as well. So I think this card's insane. Again, these are the cards that are more focused on Tearlament. You could say Crow is good against Spright. You could say Bell's good against Spright as well, and it is, but it's not anything too crazy. But these cards, we've played them before. Like, these aren't super impressive new cards that, they're not hidden techs that destroy the meta, right? But, like, I think they're actually creeping back in. Now, of course, you could say Ash is good as well, but I don't feel like I need to put Ash here. Of course, you have, like, other floodgates that are really good, right? Like, Rivalry is probably better than Gozen right now, so Gozen's not that great. Summon Limit if you're a very heavy trap deck, or you are siding for Go First. Summon Limit's, like, okay in certain decks. But there's a big elephant in the room, right? We just had Mystic Mine Burn win an event, and until Konami releases a ban list that could potentially axe Mystic Mine, we have to prepare for it. And there's a couple of cards that I think obviously you should be playing in your side deck. We have Cosmic Cyclone. You should be playing this somewhere in your main or side. If you're playing Tearlaments, of course you can play Galaxy Cyclone. But Mystic Mine is becoming a huge problem, so maybe we should start siding a little bit harder for it. Running multiple cards in your side deck, like the Feather Duster, you should already be running the Twin Twister potentially. These are just very standard back row cards, nothing super crazy here. Lightning Storm. But an interesting thing about this is they are running cards like specifically the, what is that card called? Forbidden. Yeah, here we go. Curse Sealed the Forbidden Spell. And in Mystic Mine Burn decks that are running this, spell cards, they're very not amazing versus stuff like that. So if you wanted to counter Mystic Mine specifically, you could play something like Typhoon, which I'm not saying I recommend this because the current meta would leave you, like, it's only good versus Mystic Mine, right? But say you just really wanted to out Mystic Mine, this is something that could out Mystic Mine that can't be Curse Sealed, something like Heavy Storm Duster. This is a more reasonable card. If you're like a trap deck, you might want to play this anyways. But also, I wanted to talk about another card we've sort of forgotten about. Meow's Click is interesting because I think if you are playing something like specifically Math Mech, because this is a Cyburst monster, you can sort of use this to your advantage. You could definitely like side a Meow's Click in Math Mech, which I've seen no one do for Mystic Mine, which I think is really weird. Like, I think if you're playing Math Mech, this card's great, because if you don't know what this card does, if a field spell card is activating, you special summon this card from your hand, that's not like a big deal. Here's the kicker. During your turn, the effects of face-up cards in your opponent's field zone are negated. During your opponent's turn, the effects of face-up cards in your field zone are negated. This is a continuous effect, so it's not stopped by Mystic Mine. So you could run this in Math Mech and really get sort of an edge against Mystic Mine players. I feel like one of this in the side deck for Cyburst decks, if you're on something with Cynet Mining already, this could be a good card. And I say that like half like finding a cool card that not many people are on, and half like pretty seriously, because I think if you're on a Cyburst deck like Math Mech, siding one of this could potentially be good. I'm not a Math Mech player, I could be wrong about that, but on paper, I'm telling you guys, this is the spice. But yeah, I think that's going to cover it for this meta analysis and talking about cards. I mean, we have we have 14, potentially 15 cards down here that are great side decks for the current meta. Of course, you have the very standard generic cards that are always good. Dark Ruler no more. I don't want to like leave this video not having Dark Ruler or Ultimate Slayer. These cards are obviously insane, right? But I wanted to talk about other cards that aren't as generic as these, maybe. So yeah, we have 15 cards down here. We have 4 cards, 19 cards we talked about that can help you versus the current meta if you're not on them already. Now, these are very specific, so these are the more specific outs. These are the more generic outs. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me down below what cards you think actually destroy the current format, like what cards you think I should have listed in this video, cards that, maybe no one else is on that you're on that destroy the current meta. I would love to read them down below. So again, this has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.